Hello and welcome to Psycho Killer, the authentic podcast for true crime lovers just like you and just like us. I'm Simon Ford, a journalist, broadcaster and sometimes a lecturer in journalism. And with me is Jacques-Morrell, formerly a major crime detective who retired from the police service after 30 years on the job and then realised you couldn't hang up your boots.
That's about right.
Which is why he is our authoritative guide to what goes on behind the scenes of a serious crime investigation. Now, between us, we like to bring you stories about mainly, though not exclusively, British crime, seen through the lens of the people who've been there, seen it, done it. You know the story, from the pre-dawn raids to the mass murder trials and everything in between. Now, Jack was briefed for some considerable time on nabbing the offenders and bringing them before the courts. At the same time, Muggins here reported on the twists and turns of those investigations and their resulting court cases from the press benches. Now, today we're going to discuss a crime that was solved by Jack's team, and Jack is always quick to remind me that successful detective work is a team effort, isn't it? However, one vital piece of this puzzle is missing. So, Jack, let's get right into it. Tell me about the case. It's an intriguing one, this.
It is, yeah. It's a no-body murder conviction is the ultimate result of the investigation. We're going back to 2014, January of 2014, when we are made aware in Nottingham of a missing Polish national, a young man, early 20s, by the name of Bogdan-Nawrocki.
How did Bogdan-Nawrocki come to be in the UK and in Nottingham, ultimately?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one, because we've always been used to numbers of Polish nationals in this country, even pre them being part of the EU. They've been a valuable part of our society and our economy. But there's a dark side to it as well, and there are people who are brought over. Effectively, the term I think is a wage slave, and Bogdan and several of these compatriots around him were part of this process. And basically what was happening over in Poland was that whether people came out of prison or had just got issues in their lives where they weren't happy, and they were exploited, and they were invited, "Oh, come to the UK, we'll get you a job, we'll get you a nice place to live, you'll have a much better life in the UK."
And when they arrive, it's not like that.
The reality, well, I mean, in principle, I suppose they could, they were gained employment, whether it's in warehousing, packaging, factory work, that kind of thing. But they have to hold that job down. And the problem was that the people who were exploiting them would seize their passport. They would control their lives in terms of where they lived, which was probably substandard accommodation, and they expected to give the majority of their wages back to their handlers or the people who were managing them.
So they're gangmasters, I think.
The gangmasters, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, yeah. No, I get the picture. So Bogdan-Nawrocki is in his early 20s. He's come here, he's a fit young man, but he's found himself in this trap where he's effectively working for a gangmaster. He has no control over his wages. They've probably taken his passport. He's trapped. What does he do?
Well, he rejected that lifestyle and ended up, unfortunately, whether he had problems with alcohol and the like beforehand, he fell into the wrong crowd, basically, and he became a problematic street drinker, is probably the easiest term to use, along with other compatriots who were living the same sort of life, a chaotic life that was effectively spiraling downhill. You then come to notice of the police and other issues within society, and they weren't quite visible. But he goes missing, and this is the key thing. He was in Nottingham, where his sister, who was living a completely different life, was settling and working and living a decent, honest life. And he was in contact with his sister. And it was his sister that went to the local police to say that he'd gone missing because something in his routine, she hadn't seen him, she hadn't heard from him, and she was concerned. That was obviously a local missing person inquiry, which took several weeks. And bear in mind, when he was reported missing, we were probably 2 weeks already behind the fact that he was ultimately been killed and was never seen again. So that investigation, that early local police investigation, was handed to the CID. They did a little bit more. They became increasingly concerned. There was some publicity being put out to try and locate him. And then it came to us, I would say, weeks, if not a month, after his actual disappearance.
What was it led you to the conclusion that he was dead, he just hadn't disappeared, he hadn't fled the country, gone back to Poland, started a new life?
I mean, that's a good question. It was a slow burner inquiry, and in so much as the information came through very slowly, it was specific to the Polish street drinking community, which posed difficulties in terms of finding witnesses, getting them to talk, getting them in the right state and frame to speak. And the information sort of slowly came in to the point that there was no other explanation other than he'd come to some harm. Again, it took probably a couple of months, I think, before the arrest, when we actually found a premises where it was clear that he'd been, and several of his compatriots had been, around the time of his disappearance, and that became interesting to us.
And when it comes to interviewing the witnesses, the people who might be able to point you in the right direction, clearly there's going to be a language barrier there, isn't there? How much of an impediment was that to the investigation?
Your
Polish isn't fluent, and I doubt most of these people spoke fluent English. So
it slows the whole process down. Yeah, and again, these individuals weren't the Polish nationals who did speak good English and were educated and maybe came with a skill or a professional background. These were less so. So that meant that, as you say, they didn't speak good English. They weren't particularly easy to get hold of and easy to get in the right frame of mind to talk. So we used interpreters. And that process really does slow the thing down. Not just the translation and the ambiguity of what some of these people will say to us, but the fact that it's just a slow process. It's almost, you will find the individual, you will arrange the facility to interview them. You would get an interpreter arranged, you would bring them in, you would sit down. Most of these would go onto video now as well. That takes time. You would then make notes, or the officer overseeing the interview would make notes and bring it back and hopefully get the gist of what the individual is saying. But then it goes to an audio typist that will type up the whole interview. It will then get looked at in more thorough detail. So it could be several days before you've actually got the meat of what these individuals are saying.
There's a lot of steps in the process as well. So at each step, maybe something could be lost in translation, even if it was a typo that was introduced by the audio typist. Something could change, couldn't it, from the actual the original statement in Polish to the final translated version in English presented to the SIO.
Or just certain comments that were missed and weren't seen as particularly important or relevant at the time. It's almost like, say, you've got a partial deafness where you need a hearing aid to help you to pick up certain sounds or words, etc. it's almost like that there's a delay to the understanding of exactly what you've got. So yeah, it does. It just takes a little bit longer.
So you've already found yourself several weeks behind a curve on the investigation. This guy's been missing for about a month. You've identified a house that was used by him and his associates. That was managed by a homeless charity, wasn't it? So, but when you got there, there wasn't as much evidence as you would have liked. Most of it had been erased, hadn't it? How had that happened?
It had. I mean, I think we're talking January, February, March. We're probably talking a couple of months now on. The use of that house by these Polish nationals had ceased. They'd moved on for whatever reason, and I can't remember specifically why. So the premises had been, or in the process of being prepared for a new tenant, and it was apparent that the previous tenant had actually redecorated, which is probably an unusual feature, and they'd slapped some more magnolia over the walls, which started to ring a few alarm bells for us.
You think they painted the walls to cover up evidence,
yeah,
maybe cover up blood spatter or whatever, yeah?
And other timings of things, we felt that this was probably the premises where he'd met his end. And yes, unfortunately, there was still traces of his blood underneath the new coat of paint, and the specialists who came in to look at blood pattern analysis identified that he'd died a sustained, or there'd been a sustained violent attack at low level.
Meaning he was on the ground?
Yeah,
or, yeah.
That he'd effectively,
and the blood's gone up. Yeah.
Yeah, or spread out across the wall. Effectively, you can't beat about the bush on these things. But he'd had a good kicking.
He'd had a good
kicking while he was on the floor, probably over a period of time, maybe a day or two. And unfortunately, I've seen this before with Polish nationals who are street drinkers who fall into that category. It's almost a powder keg of an existence when they're all in these premises together, drinking heavily for binge drinking for a long period of time. Sometimes the level of violence really is very, very disturbing amongst them, and he was clearly subject to that.
So he's being extensively bullied to the point of being tortured. Whenever their compos mentis, they start beating him up. Why were they doing it? Was it because they knew that he'd fled from the gangmaster? Was it
no.
Orchestrated, or was it just
no? It wasn't. It wasn't a gangmaster related thing. It was more. I think more his personality and his behaviour was pissing these people off. They were sort of fed up with his own behaviour. And this is that powder keg thing I'm talking about. That there is a way out for these people, but they're in such a narrow community in effectively a foreign country, and clearly they find it difficult, and they just drift into this cycle of this downward spiral.
So how did you go from, okay, he was on the ground, he was given a severe beating over a period of days, to we now think he's dead?
Well, it was, most of the information really came through as rumours through his compatriots and through the network that he was with, and through the community. So, and speaking to them, and there were, I think, the number of arrests, we ended up convicting one man of his murder, but there were at least 5 or 6 arrests of associates who were involved in some way, whether they were a witness to what had happened and kept quiet or whatever. But we never got the full facts from them, but we got little bits of information to suggest how he'd been buried, that he'd been taken away. There was talk of him being removed on a shopping trolley in the middle of the night and covered over. that he'd been buried and then buried again for some reason, and that came through with some ambiguity. And I think I mentioned, when we spoke last time, that there was mention of him being moved to a permanent grave, which made us think...
Did that mean a cemetery? So you've gone from a shallow grave, a temporary grave, to a permanent grave, but was that a permanent grave in a conventional cemetery, or was it just a deeper hole somewhere that had been dug for the purpose?
So we just had to follow the rumours, the information with these other people involved. Maybe they were using a squat at a particular time, or maybe they were living in tents at a particular location. These are very transient people, albeit they stayed within Nottingham. So we had to seek every opportunity and search every place where potentially this man could have been buried.
But no body. Still no body.
But no body.
And you have a prime suspect at this point. There's various evidence has pointed towards Robert Marcinkiewicz Suchowski. This was the sixth man you arrested, and this is the man who was eventually charged and convicted with Bogdan-Nawrocki's murder, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit about him. Tell me about the suspect. How did you finally actually narrow it down to the point where you could definitely say this is the person we're going to charge? We're going to recommend to the Crown Prosecution Service that he's charged with murder and taken to court.
Yeah. Well, we arrested and charged him in April, so we're talking 4 months after the disappearance. And you have to accept that because we were always playing catch-up, the kind of evidence that you would hope to have, the wider CCTV and the other data that we would use, wasn't there, or certainly not in a large amount of work. But we got these premises where he obviously had control of, which was important. And again, the people on the periphery of all this were hinting, pointing the finger. On saying that, though, when we spoke to the other people, they never admitted anything, and nor did Robert admit anything to what had happened. It's always convenient, isn't it, when you speak to people in these living this kind of lifestyle, when they're stuck in a hole and they can't really explain something, they will just claim they were drunk and they can't remember anything. Right. So it was very much a drip feed of information, but there was sufficient to charge Robert with the crime, albeit there wasn't evidence to charge anyone else. So he stood alone, and then we obviously had to prove to the court and the coroner that Bogdan-Nawrocki was dead, that he wouldn't be...
And how do you go about doing that? First of all, with the coroner, who would conduct an inquest, which is somewhat difficult if there's no body, there's no post-mortem examination because the body's not been found. You've got a series of unreliable witnesses who don't speak English, whose evidence is obscured by the fact that they're alcoholic to a certain degree, one way or another. You've got all these statements scratched together, and you've got to convince, first of all, the coroner that somebody actually is dead. They've just not disappeared of their own volition. And then secondly, you've got to get it to court, and you've got to be able to, the prosecution's got to be able to prove that the suspect in the case, the man who's accused of killing Bogdan-Nawrocki, actually did it. Yeah,
well, it becomes almost an evidential file on its own.
I was going to say, it sounds almost like an impossibility, really.
Yeah. The other interesting aspect, though, is that even though this individual led a pretty sort of chaotic life, that there is some routine and regularity to it, even though he's unpredictable, So you've got the sister, you've got the parents or the family back home in Poland, no contact whatsoever, no use on a phone, that kind of thing. you would have identified maybe the shop where he went to buy the drink or provisions from, not being seen there. The local community support officers and the local police officers who would know these people. Yeah, we've not seen him. And equally as well, the fact that these gangmasters tend to take their passport from the individual they're controlling. So we'd have to check, has the individual gone to the Polish embassy to have a replacement passport? Have they left the country? Because again, I don't think there were particularly good embarkation checks of these people. So you have to ascertain whether they'd got a renewed passport, a replacement passport. That obviously wasn't the case. So the whole thing builds up to say, from this particular point, we can be as certain as we can be that this man is dead.
And is that what's called proof of life? You can't offer proof of life.
Yeah, we could. Yeah, you would say the only time we can offer proof of life was up to this point, and that sort of helps to give that the timing of when he died.
The coroner was satisfied that this was the case. The CPS was satisfied that this was the case. There's part of me wonders that maybe somewhere watching this podcast on YouTube is Bogdan-Nawrocki, having gone to another country, cleaned up his life, started a new existence. How likely is that, do you think?
It's extremely unlikely. It won't happen. It also would appear to be unlikely that those who know where he is have not come forward.
Even though a £5,000 reward was offered, wasn't it?
Well, that's exactly right. And you know, let's be frank, his sister did a tremendous effort to try and locate her brother, including the reward. We published information in Polish as well, and nothing's come of it, you know. And it did surprise me when we decided we were going to talk about this case, that obviously I double-checked whether I'd missed something in the news as to whether his body had been found, and clearly it hasn't. And it's a shame. It's a shame because there's people out there who do know of it.
It does make you wonder, doesn't it, how on earth you dispose of a body to the extent that there is no evidence, there's no trace left, particularly when your lifestyle is so chaotic, you probably don't know which day of the week it is when you wake up.
Yeah, I mean, what was interesting, I think we must have conducted about 40 searches of either dwelling houses, derelict factories, waste ground, and there was again this period of looking at allotments, which was interesting because I never realised the number of allotment gardens there were across this old part of the city of Nottingham that you just don't know exist. They're tucked out the way, and there was a suggestion that he could well have been buried in an abandoned allotment. And that as well, I don't think translates particularly well with Polish. So again, you've got this, are they talking about allotment, or are they talking about waste ground, or are they talking about someone's garden? You know, it's so difficult because I don't think in Poland they have what we would call allotment gardens. So yeah, it was, there was so many places. I mean, if you think of, I recall Robert, the suspect and the man convicted of this, at the time of his arrest, 3-4 months later, he'd not actually fled Nottingham for whatever reason, and he could have done. He got no real ties or roots in Nottingham. He was rough sleeping in a tent near to the Queen's Medical Centre, which is the main hospital in Nottingham, and that opened up a sort of more options because he was living on some waste ground, and there was I seem to recall an area between some university premises and something else where there was some land, and there was some evidence of the earth being disturbed in this little wooded area tucked out the way, so that had to get assessed.
So immediately forensic go in there and they look for a body there.
Yeah, and it was bits of old metal had been buried and stuff. But yeah. I mean the other shocking thing as well I found there, and whether it was the reason that these people were rough sleeping near to the hospital, is that so chronic was their alcoholism and their lifestyle that they were going into the hospital, because obviously hospital doors are public and free, there's no restricted access as such. They would go in for maybe a warm, to get warm, and they were also drinking or consuming the alcohol hand rub that's there at every doorway. I mean, what that did to their digestive system and their insides, I've no idea, but I don't think it did them much good at all.
They're desperate people, aren't they?
That's the level of, And this is the other thing that I felt ought to be said, because this happened in 2014, 2015. It's before the EU referendum and the vote leave. And obviously these kind of individuals are so visible and antisocial that they give their fellow compatriots a bad name. And for all the good people doing good things and working here, these are visibly a problem. And majority of them could have been removed if the border agency had the staff and the wherewithal to deal with them, because they weren't seeking work, they weren't actively seeking work, and they weren't in work, and that's a breach of the treaty rights. And the other thing that surprised me, there was not only the fact that they got charitable housing. This thing, there was another line of inquiry that we had to do where we were looking for a particular type of clothing, or when these individuals had changed their clothing, and they were going to another charity, a drop-in centre that used to give clothing to street people for all the right reasons. Warm, clean clothing when they've been living, and this is winter time as well. And we found that they were also supporting these people in terms of filling out forms and stuff so they could get further support. And I don't want to sound harsh regarding this, but there was a clear opportunity, and these individuals probably needed a pretty forthright conversation about where their lives are going, because they're not functioning, and they needed to go back home. Not for any reason that we don't, they shouldn't be here in the first place, but their lives were failing. They were living this lifestyle, and their fellow, the other Polish.
They just kind of washed up on these shores through one reason or another, and found themselves adrift in the middle of a city in the English Midlands, where the only lifestyle they knew was the lifestyle that their compatriots were living.
Yeah, and
and in breach of their terms and conditions under the treaty as well. So.
And the wider Polish community would have felt exactly the same.
I'm thinking about my neighbours in London, who were two Polish families, extremely hard-working, children working hard at school, building a new life for themselves and for their descendants here, sending money home to support the family in Lublin, this kind of thing. But of course, what we see, the optics, you'd say, are on the people who are the most visible, and they're the ones who are causing trouble. They're the ones who are coming before the courts, accused of and eventually convicted of murder.
And it's investigations like this that look in detail at what's happening between these individuals, that it sort of highlights the frustration in how these people aren't really helped. They might be helped to be put in accommodation, or they might be helped with meals and bits of clothing. But ultimately, their lives aren't being helped because they're still on this spiral, this downward spiral, and
they need the tough love.
Yeah, and I mean, even with the outreach workers on for the street, the rough sleepers, they would have Polish-speaking individuals working there. So everyone's trying to do something, but it failed because you've got to think that had some more sort of robust or forthright advice been given to this group, then maybe Bogdan's death wouldn't have happened because there would have been some.
So he might still be alive.
Intervention.
Yeah.
Proper intervention, not just
charitable intervention, which if
to tick over.
Yeah, it was an enabler.
Yeah.
No, I get it. And a couple of quick questions from the prosecution point of view. Robert Marcinkiewicz-Stokowski never confessed.
No.
What was the jury's view of him? Can you remember the conviction? Was it unanimous or was it a majority? Or
I don't actually remember that. I mean, I've discussed the case. I wasn't there actually at the trial because at the time of the trial, which was 12 months later, which was in early 2015, that was my last year of service, and I've been farmed out to another inquiry for that period. So yeah, I mean,
doing something different. Yeah. I get it.
And again, I mean, if you think back, this is the only time I've dealt with a murder case, a successful murder investigation involved where a body was
where
not recovered.
There's no body. That was the other question I was going to ask you.
Was it?
Yeah, incredible that, isn't it? It's almost like I wrote it down. Have you ever come across another case where there's been a murder but no body?
No, I haven't. And the only one I'm aware of within Nottinghamshire, which is the where we're talking now, I think there's one other, but it's still officially a missing person case because no one's been arrested for his murder, and that is a more gangland criminal underworld case. And bearing in mind, I'm trying to
name names on this one. This is a guy who disappeared a few years ago. Yes, this
is James Brodie.
James Brodie. Yes. So yes, the James Brodie story is one for another time, but it's a cracker as well. And if you've seen the film Hot Fuzz, watch this space. I actually reported on, and it was called at the time, the murder without a body, on the assumption that this woman, Patricia Hall, who was 39 years old at the time, in 1992, she was a mum. She came from Pudsey, which is a little market town that's now been swallowed up by the larger Leeds conurbation. And she disappeared at the end of January 92, following an argument with her husband, Keith Hall. And despite extensive investigations, her body was never found, and she remains classified as a missing person. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Keith was later recorded by an undercover officer confessing to killing his wife. No details, but he did confess, and he stood trial for murder. However, the surreptitious recording made by the undercover officer was ruled inadmissible as evidence. His defence counsel successfully argued that Keith Hall hadn't been under caution when the recording was made, so it was inadmissible as evidence. Interestingly enough, the judge then decided to allow the confession tape to be aired in court, to be played in court. And this is how the whole story, I mean, it's a case within a case, this, of a honey trap that had been set to lure Keith Hall into confessing to murder. And a honey trap, I did have to look this up actually, because it's one of those words you see in tabloid newspapers, Guardian reader, which gets bandied around by journalists, but it is, and I quote, a scheme in which someone is lured into a compromising or revealing situation, often using romantic or sexual attraction as bait. The The term is commonly used in espionage, law enforcement, and private investigations where an operative, sometimes called a honeypot, seduces or deceives a target to gain information. And what happened in this case was that, it was pre-internet, but Keith Hall struck up a relationship with somebody whom he met, and it was no coincidence that he met this person, because this person was an undercover police officer. And during the course of a romantic relationship, which lasted some considerable time, and a bond of trust developed between the two of them, the pinnacle of this from the police point of view was that he made this confession. I'm not quite sure what happened immediately afterwards, whether or not they just sort of went round and slapped the cuffs on the next morning. But Keith Hall was acquitted, and what became of Patricia Hall has been the subject of speculation ever since. For example, a documentary which aired on Amazon Prime in 2022 called The Confession.
Did you kill your wife?
No, I didn't, no. Patricia, if you can hear me now, we all hope that you're alive and well.
For the sake of Pat, I would have done anything. We were desperate to know where she was.
I wake up every day for the last 30 years thinking what happened to my wife.
To put it simply, we needed a miracle. And then suddenly...
Hello?
So, as of January this year, 2025, 33 years since Patricia Hall disappeared off the face of the earth, West Yorkshire Police is now holding a review, you'll be interested to know, into the cold case. They're trying to provide answers for Patricia's family. And Keith Hall, to give him his due, he brought up their two sons single-handed after this and had to deal with all of the fallout from the honey trap and the court case, and rebuild his life after that as well, and maintains to this day his innocence. Assistant Chief Constable of West Yorkshire, Pat Twiggs, who is the lead for specialist crime and criminal justice, told the Yorkshire Evening Post, "Our major investigation review team is currently conducting a cold case review into the disappearance of Patricia Hall, which is a process that we carry out periodically as standard procedure for unsolved cases. That review is likely to conclude in the next few months." So this is January this year. It's March now. Watch this space. "We are maintaining contact with Patricia's family and doing everything we can to support them and keep them informed, and we would still welcome any new information that could assist in getting her family the answers they need." To this day, Keith Hall maintains his innocence and describes his wife's disappearance as a mystery, and so it remains. But there are cases where people disappear, and other cases where the disappearance is treated as murder, and they're relatively uncommon, but not as uncommon as you might think. Am I right?
No, and I think that sort of tip-off to find these bodies that have been buried and hidden for years and years, in this case, is interesting. I mean, going back to Bogdan's murder, there are several people, not one person involved here, who know where he is. I'm sure probably more than we believed who know where he is, and that's interesting because, I mean, at the end of the day, whatever method the police may want to use, whether it's a honey trap or covert activity like that, all the police need, in fact, I'll rephrase that, all the family need, the family of the person that died, all they need is just a tip-off. Just to say, this is where you need to go. It can be anonymous. I'm almost sounding like a Crime Stoppers announcer, but this information can be passed.
It's a good point, though, isn't it? Because you can see how people might be concerned that they would incriminate themselves. Certainly, in your case, somebody's already in prison, and coincidentally, I would imagine has probably cleaned up their health considerably, having benefited from being cared for in prison rather than living in a tent near a hospital. But the idea that you're not going to incriminate yourself if you just provide anonymous information, but you do provide potentially closure for the family and for this man's sister, who has been waiting for years and years to discover where her little brother's buried. Yeah. And if somebody wants to do that, that's as simple as what? What would you do if somebody wanted to do that? Walk into a police station?
There's various methods, isn't there? Yeah. Walking to a police station would be good, but of course, a lot of people may be reluctant to do that. But you can communicate stuff quite easily, even through a third party. Or a written note, whatever. There's so many ways of doing that now, or a message to the relative. But yeah, 10 years on, where are all these people now?
And even longer with the Patricia Hall case. Yeah, disappearance, not murder. It's still a misper, but 33 years have elapsed. So it might not be long before the people who have the key information in this case are no longer with us. They have passed on. Yeah. It's fascinating. Thanks for telling me about that, Jack. That's a really illuminating insight into how a very difficult police investigation was conducted with relative success, except for the family. And I think it's really important that we remember that at the end of all of this, although we are obsessed by true crime, the actual truth of this, the verisimilitude of the crimes, means that there are real people and real consequences, and we don't forget that, do we? So
I think as well, on these episodes, we often try and look at the suspects and the people convicted as to their level of psychopathy. And with this one, I've thought about it, and it would be wrong to try and even make an assessment of Robert Martinovich. However, the behaviour of these people, it was so deplorable because of their alcoholism and the state they were in, is that I don't think they're capable of making a rational judgment. It's just almost depraved, drunken violence, which is an awful thing. But if those people have cleaned up their lives, if they are in a better place now, maybe that's time to consider what happened, what really happened.
Definitely. Jack, as always, a pleasure. Do join us again soon, please. We know that you love what we do. If you'd like to contribute to our work, we have a Patreon account. It's always great to hear from you through our website, psycho-killer.co. But for now, from Jack and myself, it's cheerio from Nottingham, and we'll see you again very soon for another Psycho Killer true crime story.